Hi, thank you for joining me for Bible study. We're here looking in the book of Exodus. It's the Wilderness University, and we're going to be hearing from a different perspective today. The main character isn't Moses as much as it is his father-in-law, and that's an important term in this, obviously, because it gets repeated a lot. So we're going to hear from Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, because he's been hearing stories coming out of Egypt from the caravans of tremendous plagues that have afflicted Egypt, that Pharaoh has been in trouble as he can't control the chaos that is happening in Egypt. And yet the children of Israel seem to be at the focus of those stories that are coming out. And then finally, the death of the firstborn, I bet you that's one of the stories that came out. And you have to wonder, would they believe the stories, or they just thought it was exaggeration from the caravan people? But as news came to Midian, Jethro and Moses' wife and his kids would gather that Moses is more than okay, that something unusual is happening, and that the children of Israel are headed into the desert. And so when Jethro finds out that they're close, he's going to go get to the bottom of this. And so let's see what happens here. Exodus chapter 18, verses 1 through 12. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back with her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. This is the word of the Lord. So Jethro hears the news, he gathers up the family, and he's headed to see Moses here. The Lord had defeated Egypt, and he wants to know what's going on. Now, as you gathered, repeated often, this is Moses' father-in-law. Moses was basically adopted into this family when he was a fugitive from Egypt and lived among the Midianites for 40 years, roughly. And there is a close kinship here for Moses and for Jethro. And it comes through as you see their greetings, and this is family. But it also raises the question, if Moses is 80 years old, how old is Jethro? Wow. And so word gets to Moses, Jethro's here. And it's interesting. The focus is almost entirely on Jethro, the father-in-law more than it is on Moses' wife. Now, don't read too much into that, because I honestly think it comes down to Moses kept his family, his private, personal business. She didn't need to be a sermon illustration throughout all the stories. But this was a big deal, having the priest of Midian come to hear of what God had done for Israel. And we're going to unpack that a little later on. But I want you to first see the significance in this. Moses goes out to meet Jethro. He leaves the camp to meet him and to bring him in. And before he brings him in, he bows down and he kisses him. And the bowing down is a way of one who is lower showing honor to one who is his superior. But then the kiss shows that it's not a hierarchical thing, as it's also an intimacy thing. They are close to one another. The only other kiss recorded in Exodus so far is when Aaron saw his brother for the first time after 40 years. And so it's that dynamic, but it's an important lesson for us in that you're never too old to honor your parents. You're never too big a deal to honor your parents. Because I don't know how big a deal you think you are, but you're probably not the king of a small nation like Moses is. He's not officially crowned, but he is the leader of this nation. He has direct communication with the Lord. We get to pray to God. And a 5-year-old asked me, well, why is it I don't get to hear from him in my ears? Well, that's a unique privilege that we don't get very much of, if ever, but it's one that Moses had throughout his life. And so it is significant when Moses bows down and kisses his father-in-law. And notice, no agenda here. It's not like two government functionaries. No, it's, hey, how are you? No agenda, but it is personal. It is familial. Asked about their well-being. They cared for one another as persons. Because again, they're family. How are you physically, emotionally, spiritually? How is it with your soul? Those were the kind of questions that were being asked. Didn't matter what the rumors were. Didn't matter what are you doing for your job. How are you physically? How are you holding up? What has the Lord done in your life recently? How do you feel in your soul? These are the things. Because I want you to remember, Moses had spent more time with this man and his family than 99% of the Israelites, if not all of them. He was related by blood to Miriam and Aaron, but he probably hadn't spent as much time with them as he had with Jethro and Zipporah. And so notice the intimacy in that he brings Jethro into his tent. Brings him in. This is my home. My home is your home. And so he is honoring this one who has been like a parent to him for almost 40 years. And they're going to have fellowship. Now, there was probably food involved. That's what we normally think of as fellowship. And if it's been prayed over, then it must be holy fellowship, right? And if it came with dessert, it was sweet fellowship. But I think fellowship is more than that. It's talking about the really important things of life, getting into the intimacy, being transparent and authentic with one another. And that's what they had here. The most important thing in Moses' life and in Jethro's life, obviously, is the things of the Lord. And so Moses tells them what the Lord had done. The Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, how the Lord had delivered them. Now, we're going to pause for a second here. Notice he gave him all of it, didn't he? It's been rough. It's been good. Which one are we better at telling? The complaining or the celebrating? I think we need to be honest with that. Are we better at complaining about our circumstances, the politics, pains, and problems? Or are we better at celebrating the blessings that God gives? You know those people. You come away and you're just exhausted after having been with them. They just drain it out of you. Jethro comes away from this rejoicing. Moses told him about the hard times, but the hard times were a way of showing how the Lord had delivered. The Lord had provided. And so Jethro comes away rejoicing. And I like it's subtle. But you see in this, in verse 10, where he's thankful for what the Lord had done for Moses. And oh yeah, for the rest of the children of Israel too. Again, that peek at the intimacy. Because I'll explain this later. I'm guessing that Jethro spent a lot of time praying for his son-in-law. When his son asked permission to go into Egypt because God had something for him to do. I don't know how much he told Jethro, but I know Jethro was probably praying. And now to hear that God had provided. And he'd provided for Israel. But this is the significant part. So we've seen where Moses honors his father and his father-in-law, his parent. He shares this good news with Jethro, tells him all the good that God has done. And we need to share that good news. Share the reason for the hope that lies within us. You have hope lying within you. Do you know the reason why? And do you share that reason? The reason is Christ and what he has accomplished for you. Because your story is yours to tell. And what's funny is people can't argue with that. They may argue with your doctrine. They may argue with a lot of things. But it's kind of foolish for someone to argue with your experience. Because your experience is what you experienced. They don't know. It is your testimony, your story. Does your story point to Jesus? Does your story cause people to rejoice in the Lord? But now Jethro is going to lead us in worship here. Jethro says, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has blessed the people and delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians." He is thankful for how God provided for Moses. And he's thankful for the deliverance of the children of Israel, even though he's not even an Israelite. He's thankful that God has done this. And I want you to notice the next line, because this is one that causes some people some anxiety. "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them." So now, does that mean that Jethro didn't already know that? That he didn't even believe that? Well, some of your study Bibles may even insinuate that. I'll admit that. That Jethro, this is the point in which he becomes a follower of Jehovah. And that is possible. We are supposed to tell our story with the goal that others would come to follow Jesus Christ. But I want you to think about this for a minute. one is that if that's true, then it speaks well of Moses and how he honored his father-in-law, and shared the story, and because that's the power of honor and the power of story, that in sharing those things, in giving respect, giving this testimony, that he would then come to be a believer. But I don't think that's what's going on here. One, do we really think Moses married an unbeliever? They were told not to in Genesis. I think Moses probably knew better. They may have had some disagreements over circumcision. They may not have. But it seems like Moses wouldn't have been adopted into a family that didn't know the Lord. Do not be unequally yoked together. They had the same God with the same name and the same story in common. Besides, he's a priest at the mountain of God. He probably was already worshiping that God at that mountain. So what is Jethro getting at here? It's because his faith had become sight. He now knew, in a way, and experience what he had always accepted by faith, that the Lord was and is and will be the supreme God over all. But to see him do it, to triumph over the Egyptian gods who had been so proud, so arrogant, it was a new experience. It was something to see. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it was new knowledge, just the same as the Lord told Abraham, now I know that you, Lord already knew those things before Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son. Now I know, Jethro says. Now I've seen and experienced how God is so much more superior. My faith has been vindicated. Now, my evidence is in the next verse. Here in verse 12. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. He's going to offer burnt offerings and sacrifices to the Lord on the altar. Now, apparently an altar they were building there, or maybe it's the one that was built there that is called the Lord is my banner. Because this is significant. And I don't think it's an accident. This is the first record in Exodus of people giving burnt offerings to the Lord. In fact, this is my reference there at Mount Moriah when Abraham sacrificed the ram instead of his son. That's the only other instance of someone giving a burnt offering to the Lord. There's other sacrifices made, but this is the first time in Exodus anyone has made a sacrifice besides the Passover lamb a few months before, that every family did. And they're doing this before God, in the presence of God. And so it is, in my mind, plainly saying, Jethro is bringing others into the presence of God to worship based on what God had done for Israel. And Moses is okay with that picture of even his brother Aaron, who's not a priest yet, but he will be here in a little while, and the other elders coming and breaking bread with Jethro. Because I think this is kind of a passing the baton. And this is our last big point in this story. Because it had been a while since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob Abraham being the common ancestor of both Jethro and the children of Israel. And as Midianites, most of them not following the true God, it seems, maybe some were, at least Jethro seems to have been, passing the baton to the next generation. It's now your turn to tell others of what the Lord has done. The Lord is in your midst. Now tell others of the true faith. Are we passing on the true faith to the next generation? I'm thankful to have had the godly influence of my mom, my dad, my grandparents, passing on that. I know where my mom keeps her Bible. I know it gets used. And I know her prayers for me. I know my brother's prayers for me. I want you to think about this. Are we passing that on? Because the reality is this discipleship starts and ends in the home. The church is a participant in it, but it's got to start and end at the home, if at all possible, from parents to children and to grandchildren. Discipleship takes time and persistence on both parts. And so Jethro is in a way passing the torch to the children of Israel. He's your God. Learn from him, walk with him, worship him. Learn of his ways. And that's what the children of Israel are about to do, because the next chapter, they're at Mount Sinai, and God shows up. In a big way, he is going to reveal himself in a new way to the children of Israel. And so I hope you stay with me in these Bible studies. God bless. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. And I hope we see each other soon.